Hey, you lovely lot, and welcome back to Crime Analyst, YouTube, and the Intelligence Cell. And today I'm going to be talking about the case of Nicola Bulley. Now, many of you have asked me to talk about Nicola's case, and I have been making a lot of notes, having read and digested the College of Policing reports. This is a 143-page report that landed on November the 21st, or I should say published on November the 21st. It's called the Independent External Review of Lancashire Constabulary's Operational Response to Reported Missing Person Nicola Bulley. A lot of pages, it's very weighty, it takes a lot of time to go through, well, to write a report like this, and certainly to read and digest and assess and analyse a report like this and think back to the case itself. Unfortunately, I have lots of documented history about the case because I've covered it extensively. So do go back and watch my previous YouTube videos about Nicola's case, because I got involved very early on. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that. But the first thing I want to say is that I'm thinking about Nicola and I'm thinking about her family. This cannot be easy for them. So let's think about them and be respectful in our comments, please, in the dialogue that we will share about the case and about what happened. The family did decline to take part in the review. So that's important to note, okay? You can draw your own conclusion from that. In my view, it speaks volumes. It speaks volumes about how they feel and really the way that they were treated. And I don't blame them. There were lots of things that they now have to deal with as a consequence, and coming to terms with Nicola not being around anymore is a very hard thing to do, but also just what happened with the investigation, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. But what I will start by saying is that I believe that they are owed an apology by Lancashire Police, at the very least, for the way that they handled Nicola's case. So I say that really as the former head of the Sexual Offences Section, the Homicide Prevention Unit, the Violence Intelligence Unit at New Scotland Yard, where I worked for a decade. And from that experience, well, I've read so many reports. I mean, I have to say this is a very weighty one, but I have read many across my career, almost 30-year career. And I've reviewed a lot of cases just like this. And I have to say, having gone through the report, I can't remember one for some time, or certainly, this one comes in the top 5 of spectacularly missing the point. And I was concerned about this report, and I'm going to share with you some of the things that really did give me concern, having read the report and thinking back to the time when Nicola went missing and what happened thereafter, and just some of the things that I shared with you on YouTube. So get comfortable. I've got my cup of tea here, my Crime Analyst cup of tea. It's going to take some time to deconstruct. Hit the like button, subscribe to Crime Analyst YouTube if you haven't already, and let's dive in. So firstly, I just want to recap, just nutshell, the case, because I remember it vividly, but we don't always remember every detail. So I made a few notes just to remind me of some of the things of what happened. Nicola went missing. She disappeared on the morning of Friday the 27th of January. And a few days later, I became aware of the case, and I was concerned about Nicola going missing, a mother of 2, and I wanted to share information about Nicola and get word out to amplify that she was missing to help, okay? And I know many of you, when I was talking about Nicola's case, you felt the same way, and it resonated with me first off as a woman and as a multitasking mama, and I was concerned for Nicola. And then a number of very odd things happened, which gave me cause for concern about the investigation. And firstly, let's note the unusual circumstances of Nicola going missing, and that's that she got up that morning, she got dressed, she got the girls dressed, she took them, they had breakfast, she took them to school, she then went for a walk and down by the river, which she'd normally do. She was on a work call, and then she disappeared. But her dog, Willow, was found, and her phone was still connected to the Microsoft Teams work call. So these are very bizarre circumstances. Now, at the time, for the first few days, it wasn't for a while that we really got any information about what happened. It was actually one of Nicola's friends who gave more information about Nicola and about what went on, i.e. the dog's harness was off and the phone was found on the floor, it was put on the bench, and just giving some detail. But there was no mention of that really by the police. No media briefing, which is very odd when it's a missing person. No briefing to the local community to help for them to start searching. Many of them wanted to search, so they weren't being utilised in the right way. And then when the police did speak out, they did a briefing and they said that they believed their working hypothesis was that Nicola was in the water and that no crime had occurred and that no third party was involved. Well, that was odd to me, that at the very start of Nicola going missing, that's what they're saying. And then they did the CCTV appeal for witnesses. Well, that didn't fit together for me. How can you say it's not a crime inquiry and they believe that she went in the water and she hadn't left the area when they were just starting to appeal for witnesses? And then you might recall that it came out that the CCTV had blind spots. They then started to appeal to drivers on the road. They named some of the roads, but not all of them. They got some of the areas wrong. And I talk all about that on my previous videos. It later came out that Nicola was deemed to be a high-risk missing person. But that came out later. And 1 week on, we see a picture of Nicola wearing the long dark jacket taken from when she was getting the kids into the car and the dog into the car. She's wearing the long black jacket. But it took a week to get that photo out. And I thought at the time that was very odd. And we're seeing that picture for the first time of what she was actually wearing on the day. And it didn't feel very urgent to me. And the police not saying much, not talking, giving a media briefing, saying not very much for a week is very bizarre in a critical timeline when somebody goes missing, like Nicola did in these unusual circumstances. Then you'll recall that there was the February 15th press conference. And I remember watching it, and Detective Superintendent Becky Smith literally was speaking through her teeth, through gritted teeth. She was clearly not happy about being there. That was very evident to me. I said that she was probably working long hours and so forth, but it didn't come off well. And the report does talk about that. I am going to talk about the report in a minute, but what happened during that press conference, she said that Nicola had specific vulnerabilities, and that was a disaster because, of course, then the media journalists were going to ask what those specific vulnerabilities were, and she didn't say. But it was after the press conference had happened that afterwards it was released that she was struggling with the menopause and had alcohol issues, and that was just such a bizarre, after almost 3 weeks on saying those two things, and it felt victim blaming, it felt misogynistic, and it felt like an attempt to shift the blame, quite frankly, and the focus, and there was no reason to put that information into the public domain. And also some people locally knew that the police had been called on January the 10th to the home address, and it looked like there might well be a distraction. They were trying to create some distraction to deflect because that call had been referred to the Independent Office of Police Conduct. So the timing, I felt, was instructive. Don't look over here, look over here. But it felt very victim blaming, and I said that you wouldn't have a man being described in that way. And then you had the Police and Crime Commissioner Andrew Snowden talking out in the media, and he was saying that he wanted to understand how the police lost control of the narrative. And for me, that was a very peculiar thing to say. And the Police and Crime Commissioner said the media, everyone shouldn't be talking about Nicola's case, and the coroner said the same, and then they kept talking about the case, and that again seemed to be very bizarre. Nicola's body sadly was found on February the 19th, and it was in an area of the river that people felt should have been searched. I'll come on to that. And then the coroner's inquest was on June the 27th and June the 28th, and I've talked about the coroner's inquest as well, so do watch my previous episodes. So I laid out my concerns at each stage of the investigation and inquiry, and it's highly relevant actually to the College of Policing review, why I went through that. So I'm going to talk to the report now specifically, in that 143 pages, incredibly detailed. I actually think probably there's far too much detail in here that needn't be in the public domain. we're told as a reader by page 6 4 times that this is independent. Well, that seems like an oversell, but actually if you forget, every page it says independent external review. And I have to say, College of Policing isn't really independent, and they were involved in the investigation. They were involved and they were giving advice, so that's not independence. You also have a lot of ex-police officers and so on, and they were part of the review. And actually, there's always this tendency to be defensive, and there's evidence of being defensive in the report, unfortunately. And they do talk about in this report that the sharing of the personal information, that was the main issue, and that it was avoidable, but it was lawful. And that's what I mean. You know, they sort of caveat it of saying, well, it was still legal to do it, but it was avoidable. But for me, that wasn't just the issue. So we don't want a sleight of hand. That was one of the issues, and it was a very important one. But for me, there were many other issues, you see, but that sets the tone for the report. And that data, that information about Nicola, well, that was personal information. It shouldn't have been shared, certainly not 3 weeks on. What was the point of that? But the missteps before that, for me, are critical that we think about. And it feels like those missteps have been airbrushed out this report, because the report concludes that the investigation was well handled. They say in this report that it was well handled and well conducted. And if you followed what happened, in my opinion, that's just simply not true. And I'm going to explain more. So in the report, you've got 5 headings. You've got chapter 1, the investigation, 34 pages detailing the early response, the investigation, the search response. You've got chapter 2 on leadership, 18 pages. Chapter 3, communications, 21 pages, 7 devoted to social media. And I'm going to talk about that specifically. Chapter 4, release of personal information, 13 pages. Chapter 5, external influences in the investigation, 13 pages, 9 of which are dedicated to Peter Faulding from SGI, who helped with the searches. And I wondered whether he might feature. Because remember, he wasn't called at the coroner's inquest, and that for me was a big red flag. And I'm going to talk more about that. But the first 11 pages, if you read it, it's the foreword and methodology, but it's general pats on the back all round, and it doesn't read well, particularly in light of if you know what happened, it doesn't read well. And I'm going to go through my main concerns. So the report does detail a lot of information, 143 pages, and what it fails to really hone in on, in my opinion, the critical issues. So it identifies that there was a lack of information about Nicola disappearing, and they talk about in the report that there wasn't a picture of Nicola circulated, there wasn't a briefing to the local community for them to help with the searches, and that should have happened. But also what's written in here is that it was, and I'm going to quote, it was difficult to get a photo of Nicola and the information. I read that several times. It was difficult to get a photo of Nicola to basically put out to people to circulate and to get information. Well, her husband was trying to get information out there, and so were other people, so were her friends. In fact, I got most of my information about Nicola and what had happened from her friend. And her friends were frustrated, and the family were frustrated. And how do I know that? Well, they reached out to lots of people. So they were frustrated with the lack of action by the police, that they weren't doing the searches. But when the police finally did search and speak out, or I should say, when the police did finally speak out, they said their working hypothesis was that Nicola went in the water. No crime had been committed. There was no third-party involvement, they said. Well, given all the circumstances, that made no sense at all. That's why people were concerned. That's why, and that's the key for me, that's what they're missing in this report. It was the circumstances that were unusual, alarming. Nicola's friend putting more information out there. They started a missing person inquiry with this working hypothesis, and in the report they say, well, we were right, or they were right, Lancashire Police were right, as if that's the end of it. But the report mentions that working hypothesis being released, the information vacuum, that there was a switch in the public's positive sentiment to Lancashire Police and the investigation to a negative sentiment about the case, but they failed to connect the dots as to why. And why it was was because of the working hypothesis before any form of investigation. They had no business, in my opinion, putting out about a working hypothesis. That's what caused the negative attention. That was the problem. And there's no mention of that in the report. Just over and over they repeat that Lancashire Police were right with their hypothesis that she was in the water. But we don't know how she got into the water. And they failed to understand the negative traction and that it was self-generated. It was Lancashire Police that generated it themselves. There was a man in black, wearing black, mentioned by the witness, Richard Rife, on the morning Nicola went missing. Well, Peter Fording also mentioned this man in black in his most recent statement. He asked the Sun reporter to take a picture of him. He was that concerned, and he did. But my question is, who was that man in black? And has he been spoken with? He was acting suspiciously on at least 2 occasions, seen by 2 different witnesses. That needs to be bottomed out. So to say, well, we were right in our hypothesis, she went in the water, we don't know how she got in there. Also, Lancashire Police report, also the independent review by College of Policing identified that they failed to identify the critical incident and declare it as a critical incident, which they should have, and that's accurate. Right. My previous department, when I worked in the Racial and Violent Crime Task Force at New Scotland Yard, created and developed the critical incident response. So it's something I know a lot about. But isn't that interesting that Lancashire Police stated they declared Nicola a high-risk missing person in the press conference? But if they did, they would have declared it a critical incident. One thing informs the other. And they didn't do that. Also, if they had declared it, and if they did see her as high risk, why didn't they cordon the bench? And there is talk about that in the report, cordoning off the bench, which myself and many others were very concerned that they didn't do that. That was a big problem. You always scale things up if you really believe something has happened, but remember they didn't. They believed that there was no crime, nothing to see here. But you always scale up because you don't get the chance to get the forensic opportunities again. Once people trample through that crime scene, once it's cross-contaminated, that's it. And you'll remember social media influencers went and took pictures at the river sitting on the bench. Well, they should have cordoned it off and then they could have controlled the scene, and that was important to do. So these are all self-created issues. They're all self-generated. So in my opinion, it's not a well-handled and conducted investigation. And on the 7 pages about social media, there's no mention of why people became negative about Lancashire Police. They write that there's a 459% negative trajectory, but they don't question why. That is a missed opportunity and a huge oversight. They focus on the blurring of the lines between social media influencers and journalists, but in my opinion, that was not the major issue. That this is missing the point, you see. Lancashire Police created these issues themselves by talking about a working hypothesis. Why put that out there? Say nothing. And I've always said that the whole way down the line, that shouldn't have been even mentioned at the start of this investigation. So Lancashire Police don't understand that it's their own behaviour, the impact of their own behaviour, and nor do College of Policing reviewers, it would seem. It's really staggering to me. It's so tone deaf. The public wanted to help. That's what people wanted to do. They wanted to assist. And unfortunately, the local community was somewhat alienated, but also the wider public when they wanted to help. So it's about how you engage people. And social media is here to stay. So they kept repeating that she was in the water, Nicola was in the water. And this was repeated so many times. And the no crime, no third party involvement. So also the specific vulnerabilities that's talked about here, when it was mentioned, the family that wasn't cleared with them. So that's a big problem, that they didn't even consult with them. And then they released that information post press conference. Someone made that decision to talk about specific vulnerabilities and not talk to the family. Who was it? There's no accountability in here. There is mention of a senior police officer reading a statement from the family after Nicola was found, slamming the media, you'll remember. And what's interesting is that media colleagues in this report said that they felt the police were trying to shift the blame and distract. And I have to say, I have to agree. Every misstep happened because of what Lancashire Police did. And it's like Lancashire Police and College of Policing, are trying to shift the blame again. And they think if they keep repeating it in the report, then it will stick. So I'm saddened to say that when I've assessed the facts of the case and read this review and how the investigation unfolded, it was not well handled or conducted as an investigation, and the interface with the media and the public lurched from one disaster to the next. And talking of shifting blame, there's a whole section on Peter Fording, as I mentioned, from SGI, who was the search expert who the family wanted brought in. I was really curious about what College of Policing would say about him. He has released his own statement. I've analysed that, and I have a lot more to say about it, but I'm going to talk about that next time because there's a lot of content that I've already shared. So I'm going to end there. As always, I'm thinking about Nicola and her family. Until next time, be curious, ask questions, and always trust your instinct.